And welcome back. For our first conversation this morning, we have been joined in studio by attorney Audrey Matura. She is here to speak with us about the laws as they pertain to domestic violence. Good morning, Audrey.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us again this week.
Well, you know me, I will talk about this issue as long as I have to. I mean, not just talk about it, I do my part, but part of it is education. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you all always bring up the topic and give me the opportunity.
So there's advocacy, there is awareness or education, and then there is also the action that must be taken in terms of being able to address the individual situation that persons may find themselves in. But those actions should be guided perhaps by what the law prescribes, right?
Yes.
Let's begin there. There is a domestic situation where a man and his wife, for instance, are in a physical altercation. And regrettably, the wife comes out on the receiving end of the fists. And she wants to come forward and make a complaint or take some form of legal action against her spouse. Where does she begin from?
Well, definitely one of the first steps you can take is go to the police station. There's a domestic violence unit in every district. And we have some people who are trained. Unfortunately, a lot of people do have bad experiences because when they go there, certain biases from the individual police officer may come out. But that's ideally the first stop if you have the courage to go there. If you don't want to go make a police report, this is where a lot of people are mistaken. They feel that you have to make a police report before you go to the courts. But no, you could go directly to the family court unit and report what happened. It does not mean you have to make a police report. Because when you go to the family court, there's an intake officer. I mean, if you've been badly beaten and bruised, you'll take your own pictures. So it does not have to become a police matter in the sense of a criminal matter. But when you go to the court for a domestic violence complaint, when you apply for a protection order, because that's the next step, the reason I go to the court is to apply for a protection order. What is happening there when the male is brought up to the court, when he's summoned, it's really a criminal process. When you have to prove domestic violence against a person and get a protection order, it's a criminal process. So you can jump the part from the police and go there. But I usually tell people go to the police station because at the police station they will take a report. They should take a report, and they should give you a medical legal form and take pictures and so. Unfortunately, I've had situations where clients come to me and say, I went to the police station and they tell me that they don't have to take one report and make I go straight to court, blah, blah, blah. That is ill-advised. Any person who goes to a police station with any kind of injuries, the law mandates that they have to do an investigation. They have to. Even if you don't have any injuries, the law provides for common assault, which is not necessarily that they hit you. They just put you in fear of being hit. So that doesn't mean that you'll have any bruise or anything, but you fear that this person would attack you. So the fact that you could go and report that and that be charged criminally. Imagine you going there beaten, bruising, and all ached up, and then the police say, oh, miss, go to court. And it takes a lot of courage. And this is what the system needs to learn. It takes a lot of courage for those women to even make an admission that he has been violating me. It takes a lot of courage. Then to actually go to a court, to a police station where everybody I know your business know. And then to go from the police station to go to the court where you sit and everybody don't know. If you don't right up from the court to sit down for one of them chair there, darn, you're there for something serious.
Yeah.
Because nobody just goes there, you know?
Yeah.
So that would be how you first start.
I think while you've essentially laid out what the course of action should be, from a layman's perspective, I would want to think that a lot of that is there's certain pressure brought to bear on an individual who, after having been physically assaulted by his or her spouse, would go and file a report against the fact that, as you mentioned, the officer to whom you're filing this report or this complaint might have his or her own bias. Then it also depends on where you are in society, so to speak. Because, face it, someone who's prominent may think twice before putting their face out there like that. And so because of that, a lot of these reports go, or a lot of these instances, I should say, go unreported. Right? But it's not to say that despite the fact that it goes unreported, the issue goes away.
It doesn't.
And more often than not, it's a cycle.
Yeah.
A rather vicious one.
It feeds the cycle.
So the non-court recourse that you can take is you have to recognize that if you are in a situation where you have accepted this abuse, you have a problem too, you know. It's not just the person who's abusing you. You've made yourself stay in a situation that it clearly indicates you have a problem. So
because you've normalized it, so to speak.
So to me, one of the key things is for women and men to seek professional help. You could go to counseling, you could go to therapy and all kind of things to help you to mentally prepare yourself to understand how to break away and walk away. Because that's the hardest part. I can take you to the police station, I can take you to the courts, and everybody say, leave, 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 and you still keep going back because you then have a problem. And I'm not saying that because you have a problem, it justifies that you're being beaten. Most likely the problems would be that in your childhood days, you saw violence in your home, you saw it as a norm, so you accept it. It could be that when you were a child, and I always go back to the childhood because I think it stems from there, you were abused, traumatized. A lot of times these women have been subject of sexual abuse, actual sexual abuse. So when they find themselves in a situation where they're being abused further, they rationalize it, like they just lock it out or rationalize it and feel like, well, nobody else will want me, I'm damaged good. And the guy, most likely you would have confided in him what has happened and he uses it against you. It can also be that you had a traumatic teenager event, which does happen. It could be that you came from a very loving home and your level of empathy is so high to your destruction. There's sometimes you say like, what a nicely girl to do it, that rough up man. But it's because her sense of empathy, and sometimes religion causes that, makes you feel that you want to save that person. But it's not your duty to save. And trust me, I know people don't see that way.
It's not your science project.
Right, but that really happens. It really happens. And I never understood that until I had to practice family law. And I mean, I've seen hundreds of clients, maybe even thousands. And I've had to understand people. When they come before me, I cannot be judgmental. I've heard some of the craziest stories. And one of the things that I've come to conclude is that a lot of women genuinely have empathy for these men. They're their projects, as one of my sons likes to call them. Mom, you don't pick up a project.
That's what I just told you.
Your science
not
project.
a science project.
and so it stems from all of that. So those are the things that court or the police cannot necessarily address, but you have to be able to address. And I think it's time we have these very open discussion. Go get therapy, go get counseling, and not feel ashamed, because there was a time.
But Audrey, you're saying very open when in fact the issue is still very much taboo.
Yes, it is taboo. It is taboo, I agree. But I think that I see a different era has arisen. And I say that from my own experience. When I was 24, 25, I actually lived in a situation of domestic violence. And I was a journalist then. A darn good one, I may say. So a lot of people knew me. A lot of people knew me. I mean, TV was a new thing then. I was like the fresh face. And I felt the embarrassment. I knew how it felt to have to go and report it. But I just decided to do it. And when I went to the family court, well, first when I called the police, they refused to act. We did not have the legislation we have now. They refused to act. I had to, because, you know, as journalists, we have access to high officials. I had to call the commissioner of police then to ask him to please help me. And then he instructed the guys. Because when the guys reached out to my house, they were like, yo, dude, that you are like, Miss White, you know, actually that's, meanwhile, that is a second level of assault on me for you to think that I should just stay there. Then when I went to the family court, it was horrible. It was horrible. It was like, they looked down on you. They literally looked down on you like, oh, B, you caused that yourself. That was the attitude I got. So I had to fight the system. I know how it is, but honestly, we've come a long way from that. And we've come a long way because even us as attorneys are more prepared to go to court to fight for you. Those days, a lot of attorneys don't want to go practice family law. At least now we have that step. I mean, it's not a lot of us who go to family court, because that's another problem. Only few attorneys go to family court, a handful of us. We're trying to service the city and the districts, and I'm telling you, it's a lot of strain, and from a business perspective, it's not the most lucrative area of the business.
You know, Miss Audrey, you mentioned something that I think, I think while we know it to be true, it's something that we're still shocked a lot of times when it occurs, and that is when we see prominent faces in conversations of domestic violence. Oftentimes, people associate domestic violence with a situation of poverty, you know, and it's so important because I look at what took place over the weekend, the report that was made of the couple that lost their lives to domestic violence. Absolutely devastating news. And it's so important, I believe, for us to reinforce that there is no bias when it comes to domestic violence.
Let me tell you, you said something that indeed is the myth or the misconception that it is about socioeconomic background, but it's not. Abuse is about power. And power does not mean financial power and political power. It means dominance over the person around you. So everybody has a level of power. The so-called street guy or woman has power, even if it's only over their children or their lover. So it's about power. So a person who exercises their power in a domestic situation has to be a person that comes from a background of massive trauma. So you say, I deal with the law, but I have had to learn the sociology, psychology of it. And while I am no professional in the field, my career has forced me to read more, learn more, not only the cases, but the books about psychology and so. And then I have come to understand that, yes, the court and the legal system tries to provide a solution, but the true solution, in my belief, is that we have to start from education from the early years. Why? Because your first 7 years of your life is your formative years. And usually it's in those first 7 years that you're in a home where you are either witnessing the violence and abuse, or you are suffering it directly or indirectly. Imagine a child seeing his father slapping up and beating their mother. Imagine what that does to them. I'll give you an example what it does. I had a case where the children came to me and begged me to help their mother. Their mother has been with their father for over 50 years. And every one of those children could have told me what they witnessed. And every one of them told me how that impacted their decision. One is an extreme alcoholic, one is an extreme religious person. One, she said, well, no man will beat me, she's very dominant. It impacts on you. Sometimes negatively, sometimes positively. One, she pushed herself through education because she's like, I would never be in a position allow a man to have that kind of financial power over me. So it impacts you. So when you see a person committing these acts, it has to be that they already suffered it from a young age. And I'll give myself as an example. I always openly say I grew up in a very violent home. At the time, of course, I don't know that. Because in the neighborhood, it was the norm that everybody beat up, then pick me, and then they fight. Like, it has become the social norm. So you do not know that this is not the norm. But your body, your whole system, I can still relive the fears I felt and the tremors when you see your father abusing your mother. Like that is a trauma that stays in your brain. No matter how old you get, it stays there. And then imagine as a child being beaten, literally, physically abused. So that traumatizes you. When I was then in a relationship, because I saw that, it affected either how I accepted it or I didn't. So as a person in a relationship, I said I would never allow that to be done to me. So I had to fight back. I could have said, well, it's the norm or whatever. But I think that what helped me was awareness, education, and moving out from that society and that immediate community. But what it did to me too, as a mother, because I was disciplined with physical violence, I found myself doing the same thing to my children, to my two sons especially. And it was when I was maybe like 30 years old, and having gone away to study, imagine how education can help you. And no, it was just before that I had to do a class in sociology, 101 sociology with Dr. Arne Smith, and that changed my perspective. And I stopped the abuse. Like I had to literally, and I recall that when I would be whipping my sons, the anger and the rage that I relived was the same anger and rage I felt as a child when I was being beaten.
I wanna point out something really quickly though, Miss Audrey, because we're talking on the topic of domestic violence, but I think it's also important for us to discuss other factors that come under that entire umbrella.
Yes.
Oftentimes when we talk about domestic violence, we only look at either child abuse or violence within relationships where either the woman or man would be the victim. But there are other forms of abuse.
Yep.
There's financial, there's emotional, spiritual, social, even elderly abuse.
Yes.
How does the law protect an individual that faces abuse in those areas?
That's a whole lot of areas. So let me tell you, there's several dynamics
Uh-huh.
that the law does not protect. For example, same-sex relationship, the law does not protect that. For example, ex-boyfriend, ex-girlfriend. So imagine you were in a relationship with someone else, your new boyfriend is your colleague here, and then your ex begin harassing him. He has no option to go get a restraining order, but he should. So it doesn't, the ambit isn't long enough. We don't, yes. The law doesn't allow brother and sister. It's very clear. A child of the family, de facto wife or ex-boyfriend, ex-girlfriend, but there is not a situation that covers that. So there's a lot of missing parts, I believe, at this stage in the law. For example, this very tragic story of Mr. Baptist that was killed because he began dating Miss Dawson.
So
and
he
then
wouldn't have been able to file a restraining order
right,
against...
he would not have been able. So
Okay, forgive me.
it's
I
a
don't
lot,
want
right?
to- yeah, but I don't want to make it seem as if though we're embarking upon a semantic argument here. But shouldn't the two things be treated separately, like domestic violence versus any other form of abuse? I'm asking because I'm thinking that domestic violence is a physical thing. Domestic abuse could be either financial, mental, emotional, or what have you. Can you go and report that your spouse is withholding money from you and you're unable to function in a household or whatever?
Yes, the Domestic Violence Act provides for that. So the reason we call it domestic abuse, because abuse covers a range of things, including the actual violence. And we interchangeably use domestic violence to cover domestic abuse, because violence, the way the law sees it, is not necessarily just physical. It's emotional violence, psychological violence, financial violence, or abuse. Use the word abuse. And yes, good question, because the law does provide for that. You can actually go to court and say, look, he has not touched me or anything, but he keeps trailing me. And when he trails me, I'm in fear. I feel intimidated. I feel harassed. Or he keeps texting me. That comes under psychological and emotional abuse. Or I've had instances where the lady said, Miss, beat me or anything. I said, but it run me down. It tell me about me this, me that, how I look, how I ugly, how I fat. That is verbal / emotional abuse. You can use that. And there's financial abuse, where outright, either the person uses his or her economic power to hold you back. So you don't work. I mean, I was shocked in this day and age that I met women who don't have a bank account. And the husband literally, or the partner literally controls the money. Or women who are working, professionals that everybody still look well manicured and pretty and well dressed. And when their paycheck comes, a certain amount has to go into the hands of their spouse. And yes, it's crazy what I've seen. Like, it's unbelievable. I mean, I once did an FB Live because it was an issue, and I called out, and not to put down people, but teachers and nurses are some of the category that I see suffer it the most. I suffer it the most for, and I have my reasons why I think so, not because they're stupid or anything, but because they're more stable, and they usually are with partners who are not financially on the book stable. They might be a taxi driver who does not have a company So when you go to make a loan, that's the person the person with the economic power is the one that the bank wants to sign off on this document. So it's women in those situations. A lot of that. It does not mean that the man doesn't work good and even make more money than her, but the requirement of the financial institution then puts her in a corner, and they're usually the ones that can show on paper how solid they are. So yes, there is all sorts of other form of abuse. It's not only financial. There is sexual abuse. I mean, the cases of sexual abuse are absolutely outrageous, that you hear those things and you don't believe that they actually are happening. But as we speak right now, I can guarantee you somewhere in this country, someone is being abused, some form of that abuse. So I had said earlier that, yes, I could deal with the law, but I think where our work needs to extend is in the preventative rather than trying to seek the cure. Because by the time you seek the cure, the person is actually very messed up, messed up.
Going back to the legal perspective here, though, and the fact that the laws that speak to these scenarios seem to be very much antiquated, because
I believe
you're looking at.
Let me find it while you talk.
We're looking at several different scenarios that come to play that were not necessarily the thing back then when those laws were being drafted, right? So for instance, if in a liberal society we've come to accept that we do have same-sex relationships, then the law has to be able to reflect the fact that it is aware that you have same-sex couples who may very well end up in domestic situations.
Oh,
but
yes.
there is no protection, as you've mentioned, for persons who face these kinds of abuses under the law.
I think they're one of the most disadvantaged category. Let me tell you why. Because first, you can't go to the domestic violence unit, to the court, because you do not fall under any of the category. And second, when you go to the police, the stigma already associated with man and man, woman and woman, and all in between, the shame that still comes with it for you to even say it. And I find that the attitude of the police officers is not the best in those situations. So then you tend to feel ashamed, you won't go report it, so you suffer more. There's no actual legal recourse, because your only real legal recourse is to report it as a crime, not for the domestic situation in which it occurs, but just a crime simpliciter. But it's more than a crime simpliciter. It's not just some random people attacked you.
Yeah.
It is your partner who attacked you, and that's in the physical aspect. Imagine being in that same situation and suffering financial abuse, emotional abuse, and psychological abuse, and the police can't address that. Only the family court, but
So
you
then
don't follow.
the question is, and I hate to put this squarely at
No, you're not hate at all. Put it.
I hate to put this squarely at the feet of the police department, but it has to do with the level of training that the persons who are attached to the domestic violence unit would ultimately have. Because if at the end of the day, you are tasked with dealing with the public. The public is comprised of so many different arrangements of people, right? So when they come to you, they may not come to you as man and woman. They may come to you in some other form. But if you're not open-minded to be able to receive the information, to be able to address it appropriately, then you begin to impose upon them your own personal beliefs as to what the arrangement should be, which in itself is discriminatory.
But I don't hate to say this, I'll say what is reality. The very police officers you're going to get help from are themselves either abusers or abused. If they're not abusers or abused from they were younger and are now in the police service, the very nature of the system of the police service is very abusive. If you read the Police Act, the level of authority with which they treat you is very open to abuse. I mean, your superior can there and then strip you of this, they can charge you for this, they can deduct from your salary. They have a system that I call a kangaroo court. It's just at the very nature where you cannot think for yourself, you only follow orders. The very nature of it is a system that is systematically abusive. So how can I, an abused person, go to you and you are yourself an abused person?
Yeah.
Either you won't have the empathy because you want it, it's a pecking order, so this is your opportunity to peck back, or your level of empathy, which is rarely there, is very high. It could go either way, but it's usually the people themselves are abusers or abused. And it's not to put them down. It's because it's a reflection of what we have in our society.
Yeah.
So I go back. The problem needs to be solved from an earlier age. It literally, I believe, that we do not have an effective social service to help to track down as soon as a child is born, track down where they end up. Let the social service get in from then, because a lot of the children, and we all live here in the reality of Belize, have you passed in certain areas and you hear them beating them, picking the tech, or you see the neglect they're going through, that in itself already festers the environment of abuse. That child will either become an abusive person or accept abuse.
And that's where I want to take the conversation right now, Miss Audrey, because you mentioned briefly about people observing or being aware of abuse taking place. My question is, what impact or what effect can the observer have where they know that an individual is being abused or abusing an individual, but nothing is being reported from the inside there? Can the observer do something about that?
Yes, you can report it, but the thing is, if you report it, are the people in place? Like, you could go to human services if it's a child, you could go report it, but are you prepared to say you saw? And many times the people say, look, I want to tell you, but I don't want them said on me. So how will you get the evidence? When you go there, the mother or the father will not admit it.
Same thing to murder, same thing for
the child, you question that child there and then they won't tell you. They're in fear. And sometimes when you remove the child from the situation, they are so traumatized that they feel that if they tell on their parents, because
they're going to get in trouble.
They are going to lose out. And sometimes where you take them is so bad that they prefer to go back where they were.
Yeah.
And we don't have the best system or best facilities to hold our teenagers and our troubled children, or to nurture them to where we want. We genuinely have a problem, and we've never been a country that invests enough in these institutions. You want to curb violence of all levels in this society, it has to start from a younger age. It has to start
Audrey,
there.
here's a scenario that I brought up on Monday when we were having a similar conversation as it regards to domestic violence, right? Oftentimes the outsider, Sabrina uses observer, I'd say the witness. The person who witnesses what is taking place has perhaps the right to make a report and say, look, I saw Audrey being abused at the hands of Sabrina. That's the scenario, right? We have the videos, we show that you're bruised up and what have you, the evidence is there. But at the end of the day, what is the reality in many cases is that you and Sabrina will make up back, and then I, the person who made the observation, witnessed it and reported it, becomes your enemy.
Yes, it's
So
true.
a lot of times that is the deterrent as to why people see and don't say anything, because they tell themselves, well, that not got nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
As the truth of the matter is, when two heads go up on a pillow,
I was
the
gonna say
whole
that.
scenario changed in favor of the couple against the individual who saw and made the complaint.
I have to agree that is so true.
Yeah.
And to me, from a sociological, social aspect, that's deeper than the law can address. But what the law can do is that it should be that they can convict the person that assaulted Sabrina without Sabrina's evidence, especially where you say there's video and stuff. And the perfect example is the Rihanna-Chris Brown situation. Remember Rihanna?
Yeah.
Back dog, didn't want to do anything, whatever. But that didn't mean that Chris Brown wasn't arrested, charged, and convicted.
Yeah.
Because there was already other evidence.
Yeah.
We need to reach that stage, and we're not at that stage yet. So I was looking for who are the persons who can report. So domestic violence offenses means a prescribed offense committed by a person against here a spouse of the person, a child or dependent of the person or of a spouse of the person, or a parent. Nothing about an ex-boyfriend, an ex-girlfriend, same sex, a brother and sister. So you could be in the same home and your own brother is abusing you, and it does not fall under this. Yeah, it's crazy. And then they explain to you in the law, they explain to you who is a spouse, and then they go de facto spouse, ex-spouse. You know, it doesn't mean that you had to be married, things like that. But I think the definition needs to expand. They explain to you that the parent means a person who is a parent or a grandparent in relationship to a child, dependent, spouse, or respondent.
Forgive me, Adrian, and maybe this is not the question for you, but I'll just put this out there nonetheless. So why is it then that we're having 16 days of activism, we have this, that, and the third, but we're not lobbying for constitutional change where the actual laws are concerned? I think that to me is the greatest irony in all of this.
Yes, I have to agree with you. I have to agree. Like, I see changes I would love to see in the law. Absolute changes that needs to be addressed. Definitely, right now, one of them is expanding this legislation. It has to be expanded. It cannot be that a person like Mr. Baptist could not have gotten a restraining order against Mr. Jamie Young. It cannot be. It has to be, because those are familiar domestic relations, no matter how you put it, even if in an extensive way. And it has to be that the law no longer requires that you, the virtual complainant, as we call in our system, has to be the one that goes and makes the report and has to give evidence. No, if I witnessed it and you, out of fear and trauma, whatever, don't want to come and report it, I am a good enough witness to say, I saw Isani beat up Sabrina, blah, blah, blah. Even if those Sabrina don't want to come to court. And that precludes Sabrina from coming to court and say, I don't want no court action, which is what happens a lot. So you made a very good point. I hate to say it, but sometimes I think these things are just for show. And the entities that have the power to make the changes are not making the changes. The other thing I would really love to see in change is that in the classrooms, from a very early age, we literally have in our curriculum this topic. It's not just good touch, bad touch. It is, we haven't taught our children how to navigate conflict. There has to be a form of prescribed, I remember in school we had critical thinking, right? So it's not critical thinking, like a prescribed thing of, I would say, mediation, management, stuff like that, something relationship management, because in that children will then learn the dynamics of mother, father, parent, whatever. How do you resolve a conflict? I mean, I remember as children, if we have a conflict at school, they bring us together and we say, sorry, these days you don't do that. You go home and you get a knife and you come and stab your classmate. You know, things like that. So it
your
has
parents
to be,
get involved and they don't want to solve the issue. They go at each other.
right.
Yeah.
It has to be that we start teaching our children how to resolve conflict. It comes down to conflict. It's normal to have conflict. It's normal for people to have conflict and don't have agreement, but it's not normal for you to then resolve it by violence, shouting, screaming, whatever. I mean, the recent videos that we've been seeing of women fighting with women has been horrendous. And it means that we as women too have not learned to resolve our conflict with other women. Then we see the violence that men are inflicting. I mean, we're talking about domestic violence here, but the issue of domestic violence in our homes is just a reflection of violence in our society as a whole.
That's
We
true.
saw it's the month of child stimulation and Women's Month. In the Belmopan market, what did we have?
A woman and a child.
But if you look at the video, the man went after what is deemed the weaker sex. He didn't run after the husband to run him down and shoot him. He ran after the woman. And when he went after that, he went after the children. And then the weaker one, the younger one, and a female. You know, you have to look at those things. And it's Child Stimulation Month, and we're not showing that we have reached farther. Child Stimulation Month should be more than just a parade. It has to be the very thing that I'm talking about. How do you resolve conflict? And in this day and age where we have social media, and the fights on social media are outrageous, we need more than ever to teach people from very young, how do you resolve from conflict? How do you walk away from conflict? How do you protect yourself from toxic people, from emotional violence, from psychological, verbal violence? And then, if we resolve it from then, because we create a better foundation, we'll have better functioning adults.
Miss Audrey, I wish we had more time to speak on this topic. I know that this is quite an extensive one, and there are so many different areas that we could look at. But we want to say thank you so much for stopping by again and allowing us to dive a little bit deeper into this conversation of domestic violence or domestic abuse. Thank you so much.
Can I just say one thing
Yes,
before? One little thing. There's a vigil
Yes.
in Belmopan at the Belmopan Market Plaza tonight at 7. Please, everybody that could go out, please go out. I for sure will go out. I think it's good for us to come together as a community and mourn together. And some of us, the reason I think it's important to go, a lot of people reached out to me like, but there's not much I can do about that.
Yeah.
It's a matter for the police. But I think as a community, we could come together
Yeah.
and let these people know we support them. They may not necessarily be there, but families need to know that we're grieving with
Yeah.
them. So
We
I invite
announced it-
everyone out.
We announced it yesterday on the morning show as well, so this is a great reminder.
Thank you.
All right. All right, we got to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking to the students of Belize High School who attended Hacia in Panama. Stay with us. We'll be right back.